The second happens at that corner of Selma and Vista Del Mar. And that's where the firearm was actually discharged, where the gunshots were fired. So the first location I want to focus on is that where the initial confrontation happens. This location is the entrance and exit of a parking structure. This is that parking structure entrance if you were standing in Argyle and you were facing towards Selma, so Hollywood Boulevard would be to your back. And the entrance is on the left-hand side there. And what you will see in the videos, this parking lot entrance has those hanging indicators on from the roof that tell you how tall the garage is, so that if you are driving a tall car, you don't, of course there's a fly buzzing around me, you don't run your car into the roof of the parking structure. And I point that out because when you watch the video, you'll actually see that red indicator as a kind of a line through the video, so you know what that is. At the mouth of that parking entrance, there are cameras that are facing the sidewalk. Those are the first view that we saw. And these cameras capture the initial encounter between the victim, Mr. Ephron, who you see there, and the defendant, Mr. Mayers. And you can see that Ills is the first one to intervene to try to separate the two of them. And then at the very bottom of the screen, you see 12E putting his hand to try to also intervene and help separate them. Now I know it goes by quickly, and you're not as familiar with all these people, so I want to kind of break it down a little bit for you and show you what the evidence that you're going to receive throughout this case. The first person that you see in that video is the victim, Mr. Ephron. The second person who you see, who is instantly confrontational with Mr. Ephron, is the defendant, Mr. Mayers. You see on the video that Mr. Mayers is immediately aggressive towards Mr. Ephron. He's pulling at Mr. Ephron's sweatshirt, and he's pushing Mr. Ephron backward and pushes him off camera, out of camera view. The third person that you see, as I told you, is Elijah Ulanger, who also goes by ASAP Ills, or he might just be referred to as Ills throughout this. If you look closely, you can actually see his stage name embroidered on the jacket that he's wearing there. And what he attempts to do is to de-escalate this situation, to get between the two men and to physically separate them. And you'll see that all three of them go off screen for a period of time. Mr. Ephron will tell you that during the period of time that they are off screen is when the defendant first produces that semi-automatic pistol from his waistband. He pulls it out of his waistband and he's holding it to Mr. Ephron. Mr. Ephron will tell you that the defendant pointed the gun at his chest and was essentially trying to point the gun around Ills, who was between them. That at the time that he was pointing the gun at Mr. Ephron, he was also threatening Mr. Ephron. I'm going to kill you. Keep in mind, these men have known each other for a long time. And Mr. Ephron will tell you, in his state of mind, he never believed that he was going to be shot. He never believed that the defendant would actually shoot him. He will tell you that had this been a stranger, someone he didn't know as well, he would have been petrified. As you can imagine, anyone pointing a gun at you would upset you. But he knows the defendant. He knows that Mr. Mayers is not going to shoot him. He knows so much so that he'll tell you he looked at the defendant and said, if you brought a gun, you should shoot it. That's how confident he is that he knows the defendant is not going to pull that trigger. Now, the fourth person you can barely see on this video as they come back into frame, I told you, is Jamel Phillips, who goes by 12E or ASAP 12. And you can just see his hand at the very bottom of the screen. When they come back on screen, and specifically when Mr. Mayers comes back on screen, you can see the gun in his hand. You will hear that that gun that he's holding is a semi-automatic pistol, or has features that are consistent with a semi-automatic pistol. Right now, as it's paused on the screen, you can see that he's holding that gun behind his back. But you will also see the gun come forward in front of his body before he ultimately tucks it back into his waistband. And you will see from the video that there were bystanders. As I said, this is a busy Saturday night in Hollywood, walking by as this confrontation is taking place. You will hear that right after that encounter that you saw, that Mr. Mayers walked away and was walking down Argyle towards Selma. Mr. Ephron will tell you that as he walked away, he looked over at 12E, Mr. Phillips, and he saw 12E putting a pocket knife away. And Mr. Ephron, and then 12E, Mr. Phillips, walked behind the defendant, Mr. Mayers, and Ills walked behind him as well. So the three men that had come to confront Mr. Ephron walked away down Argyle towards Selma. And Mr. Ephron will tell you that at that moment, his mindset about the initial confrontation changed. I told you that Mr. Ephron will tell you when he first went there, he believed that this was meant to be a confrontation so that they could strengthen their relationship. But having just had a gun pointed at him and seeing another friend putting away a pocket knife, that his mindset changed, and he understood these men never came here to try to make peace with him, that it was always meant to be a confrontation. And he decided at that moment that having a gun pointed at him was sort of a bridge too far in their friendship, and he understood he was probably never going to have the same friendship, especially with the defendant, ever again. And you will hear that as the defendant walked away, Mr. Ephron followed behind him and was yelling and screaming at him, even though he knew the defendant had a gun. Because although Mr. Ephron believed this is going to damage our relationship, he still never believed that the defendant would actually shoot at him. It's not as if Mr. Ephron will tell you that he had some death wish or that he was not scared of guns. He will not come in and say that. What he will tell you, again, is that had anyone else done this, he would have been frightened. But he had known the defendant for so long, and they were close. So he walks down Argyle towards Selma and follows behind the three other men. When they get to Selma, they all turn left, and they walk towards Vista Del Mar. And they end up at that location we've talked about, that corner of Selma and Vista Del Mar. And as Mr. Mayers stepped off the curb, he walked into frame of the camera at location number 2 that's pointing towards Selma. Now I want to take you, before I play the video again, I want to take you to that corner so that you can see from that night what it looked like. It's a small street with a parking lot immediately adjacent to it that were full of parked cars. And at 10:17 p.m. when they arrived at that intersection, and the defendant stepped off the street corner into view of camera number 2, you will see video from that location. The video that I've played for you already and that I'm going to play for you again is from that location number 2. You will also see, that's the main video that you're watching, but you'll see in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a smaller video on top of it that kind of has a bluish tint to it. And that video is from another location behind building number 2 where the number 3 is. And the video that you're seeing from that location is identified there by the green arrow. But what's important about that video, because the video does not capture the shooting at location number 3. What location number 3 captures is audio. And it captures the sound of the gun being fired twice. This is the location number 2 where the camera, the video that actually captured that shooting was. You can see the cameras at the very top corner of the building, and it's about 3 properties away from the location that we're seeing. So again, the video is captured at a distance. It's a admittedly grainy video. It's not the most clear that you could possibly have. But it captures enough features that you can identify who is who when you watch this video. So I told you the main video that you're watching is from location number 2, and that smaller location number 3 is in the corner. Before I play the video, I want to orient you to what you're seeing. Along the top is Vista Del Mar. The parking lot is just out of view of the camera at the top of the screen. Along the top left-hand corner is Selma, forms that intersection. The red arrow is the defendant, Mr. Mayers. And the green arrow is the victim, Mr. Ephron. Okay. Now what you see as the video plays is the various cameras on location number 2 switching between 3 different cameras that are mounted to that building. What's important about that, towards the end of the video, you'll see as Mr. Mayers is running away from the location, running down Vista Del Mar towards El Centro, he trips a floodlight that's motion activated, and when you watch the video closely, that floodlight is captured by both locations. So location number 2 and location number 3, those cameras each capture that floodlight turning on. And when you watch the videos together, you can see that moment in time when the lights flash on, line up. And that's how you know the sound correlates with the video that you're seeing playing at the same time from a different location. Now, I told you, we all know the video from location number 2 is from a distance. If you zoom in on the area where this incident happened, and we will play a zoomed in version of this video, what you see is a very pixelated image. But what even that captures still are the colors the individuals are wearing, which is how you can distinguish who is who on the video. You'll see Mr. Ephron's on the far left. Ills is just next to him. 12E, who's wearing the red jacket, is just next to Ills. And then the defendant, who's wearing all black, is at the bottom of the screen. Again, I understand if you watch this video one time, you may not pick up these features, but as you watch it repeatedly, you'll be able to tell who is who. And you'll also be able to tell when you watch these videos in sequence, because they walk in front of other cameras that are far more clear, that you can easily identify who is who on this video. So this is the zoomed in version of that incident. This does not have any audio. Now, as we play the zoomed in version, you'll also see that Mr. Ephron is struggling with ills. And what Mr. Ephron will tell you is that immediately as the defendant turned and pointed the gun at him, he jumped behind Ills, essentially to put Ills between him and the defendant. And you'll see on the video the defendant lunging one way and then the other way around Ills, trying to get at the victim who is holding Ills in front of him. Now, despite how dangerous this is, having a semi-automatic pistol pointed at you and discharged twice, you will hear that Mr. Ephron was not seriously injured by this shooting. He has these injuries to the middle knuckle of one of his hands. Mr. Ephron will tell you that at the time the shooting was happening, he immediately felt a burning sensation to his hand, which led him to believe that these were grazed wounds from one of the bullets that was shot at him. Perhaps they were. Perhaps they were not. Whether or not the victim in this case was actually shot or injured by this will not be something that you have to decide at the end of the case. We ask you to wait until the end of the case when the judge instructs you on the law, what elements are actually required to be proven before you make any decision. And to listen to the charges specifically and not consider charges that the defendant is not charged with. In this case, he's not charged with attempted murder, for instance. Now, before I move on, I want to focus in on the last location that I haven't talked about much, location number 4. That location is a loading dock for this building on El Centro. It's right at the corner of El Centro and Vista Del Mar. And what you'll see in the video from that location is the defendant, Mr. Mayers, and his companion, 12E, walking from Vista Del Mar up El Centro towards Hollywood Boulevard. The arrows indicate their path of travel. They're going to come from that corner and then walk up El Centro. The camera itself is in that red circle. And you'll see this video is far more clear. And you'll see features of their clothing that you can match up to the clothing from the other videos that we've already watched. For instance, I mean, you can see just from Mr. Mayer's facial features that he's the one wearing all black. You can see from his facial features compared to the video from the parking structure. And then, as I said, the various features of his clothing, the rhinestones on the hood of his sweatshirt in both videos, and the design, the rhinestone design on the chest of his sweatshirt at both videos. And taking all the videos in their totality and comparing them is how you'll be able to decide on the video who is who. Now, I played the 911 call for you that LAPD received at 10:18, which triggered their response. And you'll see and hear that at 10:27, LAPD officers responded to the 911 call. And as is their duty, they responded quickly to this call to try to, of shots fired in the middle of Hollywood. You will hear from at least one of the officers who responded to that location, and the officer will tell you that as part of their uniform, they wear cameras that are mounted to their chest. And you will actually get to watch camera that captures the police response. After this shooting, the evidence will be that all 4 of these men, the defendant, 12E, Ills, and the victim, all left the scene. You'll hear that there were at least 2 people who called 911 to report this crime who were just people living in the surrounding area, not actually involved in the altercation itself. You'll hear that the 911 callers were reporting different information. So the first call would be that the gunshots were fired at Argyle and Selma. The second call will be that the gunshots were fired in the area closer to Vista Del Mar and El Centro. You will hear from the officer that as they responded, they come to the scene looking for a victim. That's their primary focus, trying to find anyone who needs immediate life-saving attention. Their second focus will be looking for the potential suspects if they can find them. And you'll hear from the officer that as he's receiving information that's taking him to different locations, he's actually going between the different locations and trying to piece together what happened. But what will be important from his testimony is that he is not given a precise location to exactly where this shooting happened. And with the limited information that he has, he and his partners are doing the best job that they can to find any victims, any suspects, or any evidence of a shooting. You'll hear the officer talk to different people who were just out and about, try to figure out what was going on, that neither of the 911 callers would meet with them, and that they searched not only the surrounding streets, but they primarily focused on the parking lot that was right at that corner of Vista Del Mar and Selma, because the second 911 caller had told him, or had relayed that it was possible that the shooting was happening into a car. The officer will tell you that they searched the area and they did not find any evidence of a shooting. They didn't find a victim with injuries, they didn't find any of the suspects, and they didn't find any discharged cartridge cases, which are what come out of a gun after you discharge it, in the surrounding area. But again, they don't know exactly where to look with the limited information that they're given. You will also hear from Mr. Ephron that approximately an hour, and he's not precise on the exact time, but approximately an hour after the shooting, he himself returned to the location. Now, at this time, the police have already responded and left. Mr. Ephron will tell you that he and his girlfriend went there specifically to look for evidence that this had happened, evidence of this shooting. And Mr. Ephron will tell you, because he knew exactly where the shooting happened, that he was able to locate 2 fired cartridge cases. And this is actually a photograph that Mr. Ephron himself took of one of the fired cartridge cases that he found. Mr. Ephron, you'll hear, went to the police 2 days later, walked into the Hollywood police station to report this crime happening. He brought the 2 fired cartridge cases with him, and he gave them to the police. You will hear that the 2 cartridge cases that he brought in were 9mm Luger caliber cartridge cases. However, you will also hear from Mr. Ephron that immediately after the shooting, about an hour and a half later, he started text messaging the defendant. And he text messaged the defendant, "You try killing me." That was the first message he sent to him. And you'll hear that Mr. Mayers' response was to deny that anything happened. The defendant, in abbreviation, says, "What the fuck is you talking about? Why are you telling people I shot at you?" denying that any shooting has even happened. Mr. Ephron confronts him again. You set me up to try to take me from my daughter. And the defendant responds, I tried to do what? I know you hate me, I hate you too. The defendant responds again, stop making shit up. Again, denying any confrontation took place. Certainly any shooting. We have already told you in jury selection, and you will hear evidence, that after this shooting, Mr. Ephron sought money from Mr. Mayers. In fact, hours after the shootings, this is the next day, November 7th, in the early morning hours, 3:40 a.m., you'll hear that Mr. Ephron sent a message to one of his friends saying that he wants money. And identifying the reason why he wants that money is because Mr. Mayers shot at him. You will also hear that based upon these two incidents, the parking lot and the shooting on the corner, that Mr. Ephron filed a civil lawsuit against Mr. Mayers. At the end of this case, you will not be asked to award Mr. Ephron any money. So that consideration will not be a part of your what you're asked to determine. Moving forward in time, you'll hear from LAPD detectives that Mr. Mayers' home was searched on April 20th of 2022, and that during that search, LAPD detective recovered a magazine for a semi-automatic pistol that was 9mm caliber, and that it was loaded with 6 unfired 9mm Luger rounds of live ammunition. You will hear that these items were found in Mr. Mayers' bedroom closet. You will also hear that there was no handgun that was 9mm in Mr. Mayers' home that was for that magazine. So you have a 9mm magazine, but no handgun to go with it. The last point I want to leave you with before I conclude is that we expect, in this case, that the defense will call 12B, Mr. Phillips, to testify. At the time of the shooting, again, he's friends with all these participants. He's 32 years old. And it is expected that he will testify that the defendant was in fact the person on the video who fired the 2 gunshots that we hear. So it will essentially be uncontested that Mr. Mayers was the person who fired the gun at that street corner, and that he will tell you the gun that the defendant fired was a starter pistol. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what the evidence in this case will show at the end of this case. As I've said, we expect that the defense will attempt to present an alternative explanation for what happened that night. But we ask you to do one thing, which is, as you evaluate the evidence from both sides in this case, to not leave your common sense at the door, and wait until the end of the case, when you have all the evidence, to make your decision, listen to the court's instructions on the law, and return the only just verdict there is. Thank you.
All right, folks, we'll take the break now. Please be outside the courtroom doors at 1:30, as close to that time as possible. We'll have you come in, and you will hear from Mr. Pacquina. Are you going to do the all right, please don't discuss the case amongst yourselves or anybody else. Please do not go on the internet and read anything about this case, and please don't look at any newspapers. You've got to keep that mind open and impartial and objective.